Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to be talking about formations in Faenora Wildlands. Formations are very important in determining whether your team wins or loses a battle. The right formation can protect the weaker members of your team like your archers, your clerics and your witches, and allow them to continue dealing damage. Or in the case of your clerics, keep your team healed up so everyone can make it out of the fight alive. Let's get straight into it. Now before we start talking about formations, we need to take a look at the primary or the basic attack range of your characters. Knowing the attack range will let us decide where to place your party members for the most optimal setup. We'll start with melee characters first. Melee characters can only attack the closest enemy in a column regardless of which row the enemy is in. So this means that even if the enemy is in the last row of the column and there are other enemies in the first or second row in other columns, your melee characters can still attack him. Next, we'll take a look at ranged characters. Ranged characters work the complete opposite of melee characters. They can only attack the enemy in the last row of a column. Again, if an enemy is the only one left in a column, all members can attack that enemy. Next, we'll need to take a look at skills. Now, skills work slightly different from normal attacks. For AoE skills that attack either the entire row or the entire column, there's no restrictions and you can select to attack any row or any column. The Archer's Magic Missile skill is considered an AoE skill, although the attack is split into the first and the third position of a row. The MC's Phoenix Edge and Squire's Headbutt and Rush skills has the same range as a normal melee attack and can only attack the enemy in the first row of a column. The Witch's Bolt Blast and Archer's Headshot has the same range as ranged characters and can only attack enemies on the last row in any column. The Cleric's Holy Light has no restrictions and can attack any enemy regardless of their position. So these are some skill ranges that we do need to pay attention and be aware of when deciding what is the most optimal setup for your formation of your party. So now, knowing the attack ranges of your primary and skill attacks, we can then decide what is the most optimal formation for your party. The enemies have the same attack ranges as well, so their melee attacks can only target the first row in your formation, and their ranged attack can only target the last row in your formation. Okay, so knowing all this, the most optimal formation would be to have 2 melee characters in the first row, 2 clerics in the second row, and 2 DPS characters in the last row. Now, which stage of the game you're in also determines what is the most optimal formation at that point of time. During the early stages, when your MC is really very weak, what you want to do is to swap his or her position with the cleric. So during the early stages, you want to have 2 fighters or 2 melee characters up front, and typically this will be knights instead. And then 1 cleric plus your MC in the second row, and then a DPS character plus your second cleric in the last row. And during the mid game, when your MC is getting slightly stronger, but he or she is still not able to tank any attacks from the enemy, in this case what you want to do is to switch up your MC and your cleric, so your MC can go back to the last row and then your cleric can move up to the second row. And during this time, you can actually switch out one of your knights to replace it with a fighter. So this gives your party more DPS, and at the same time, it keeps both your clerics protected and your MC will be able to deal additional damage as well as a DPS character. And during the late stage of the game, at this point of time, your MC would be strong enough that he or she would be able to tank any attacks that are coming in. So you can actually place your MC at the first row. The fighter over here, you can change the fighter over to a witch. So you will then have 1 fighter in the front row, plus your MC, 2 clerics in the second row, and then 2 DPS characters, so 2 witches in the last row. So at this point of time, the most optimal setup also provides the highest DPS available, with your MC tanking most of the damage. Remember at this point of time to keep your fighter healed up as well, so your clerics should be able to do that job with no problem at all. So I have previously used different formations, and one of the formations that got me through many of my fights and many of my runs, it's actually a 3-1-2 formation. So what I did was place 2 fighters in the front, the witch in the second row, and the clerics in the last row. But this setup is not that optimal, although it can still carry you very far. It's not very optimal because it's catered to protect the witch DPS character, but you don't want that. You actually want to protect your clerics as well, but you can't do it this way because otherwise this cleric over here will still be vulnerable to attacks. So what I did was to switch it up to this formation instead, where we will then be protecting both of your clerics at the same time, while leaving both witches on the last row slightly exposed to range attacks from the enemy. Your MC should still be able to tank most of the damage. So there we have it, different formations that work for different stages in the game. What other formations do you find works best for you? Let me know in the comments and I'll run some tests with it. Thank you so much for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.